Rebecca Simmons, Becky, to anyone who mattered, sat restrained in a sleek, cold interrogation chamber aboard the Imperial flagship Zephyron Prime. The walls gleamed with an unnatural sheen, designed to be both intimidating and sterile, the very essence of galactic oppression. The room hummed softly, a quiet, eerie backdrop to the spectacle about to unfold. Across from her stood Commander Garath, a towering, reptilian brute with armored plating running down his spine. He exhaled in frustration, his jagged teeth grinding audibly. Interrogations were supposed to be straightforward. Threaten, inflict pain, extract information. But Becky wasn't playing along. Her wrists and ankles were clamped in place by restraints embedded into the chair, the kind designed to hold warriors twice her size. But her posture was relaxed, even casual, as if she were reclining at a cafe rather than strapped to an execution device. She tilted her head and stared at Garath with a look that bordered on amusement. "So," she said, "do you have a script for this, or are we just winging it?" Garath's scaled brow twitched. The girl had been captured on a minor colony world, fighting alongside the last remnants of human resistance. She should have been terrified. Instead, she acted like she was in a bad comedy routine. "The Emperor demands answers," Garath growled, flexing his clawed fingers. "Tell us the location of your people's command center, and your suffering will be brief." Becky snorted. "Oh wow, that was classic villain dialogue. Let me guess, next you'll say, 'We have ways of making you talk.'" Garath's fist clenched, but he kept his temper in check. Humans. They were unpredictable, erratic, and defied all logical patterns of behavior. He had interrogated countless prisoners, but none had ever faced their fate with this level of defiance. "Begin," he ordered. A nearby technician activated the device. The restraints pulsed with energy, sending a surge of electric pain through Becky's body. Her muscles seized, her vision blurred, and her teeth clenched against the agony. But when the charge dissipated, she exhaled sharply and let her head drop back against a chair. "That all you got?" she muttered, voice hoarse but defiant. Garath's jaw tightened. "Increase the voltage." Another jolt. Stronger. This time, her body convulsed violently. But then, through gritted teeth, she let out a strained laugh. "You know, this isn't the worst thing I've sat through," she rasped. "There was this one Fast and Furious sequel. That was real torture." Garath was losing patience. The technicians exchanged uncertain glances. The girl should have been broken by now. The doors slid open with a hushed mechanical hiss. Silence fell over the room as Emperor Zalzir himself entered, flanked by his elite guards. He was a figure of towering, regal menace, his elongated form draped in obsidian robes woven with threads of luminescent gold. His eyes, two pools of molten silver, narrowed in fascination at the human before him. "So this is the creature who defies us," he mused, his voice a measured whisper that carried the weight of centuries. Becky lifted her head, blinking through the lingering pain. "Oh wow, the big boss himself. What, did I break your favorite toy?" Zalzir studied her as one might examine an odd specimen under glass. "Humans," he murmured, stepping closer. "Such fragile things. And yet you refuse to shatter. I must admit, I find you fascinating." Becky rolled her eyes. "Oh great, I'm about to be monologued at. Just get it over with." Garath stiffened, expecting the Emperor's wrath at such insolence. But Zalzir only smiled, cold and calculating. "Very well. No more delays." He raised a hand, and the technicians scrambled to adjust the controls. The energy coursing through Becky's body amplified tenfold. A scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. Her body arched violently against the restraints, as white-hot pain seared through every nerve. It felt like being flayed from the inside out, like her very soul was being burned away. The agony went on, and on. Time lost all meaning. Somewhere in the haze of torment, she heard Zalzir's voice, distant and calm. "You are an anomaly, Rebecca Simmons. A human who refuses to succumb. I wonder, how far can you go before you finally break?" Blackness crept into her vision. Her heartbeat slowed. Every muscle in her body strained against the inevitable. Then silence. Her head slumped forward. The restraints held her limp form in place, but there was no movement, no sound. The monitoring devices confirmed it. Rebecca Simmons was dead. The room remained still for a long moment. Then, Zalzir exhaled, almost disappointed. "A pity," he murmured. He turned to his guards. "Dispose of the body. There is nothing more to learn here." 2 soldiers approached, releasing the clamps that held her lifeless form. She crumpled forward, unceremoniously hitting the floor. One guard nudged her with his boot, ensuring there was no response. Zalzir turned to leave. The moment was over. Another insignificant death in the grand order of the Empire. But then, 40 minutes later, everything changed. Alarms blared through the halls. Technicians scrambled to their stations, eyes wide with disbelief. Surveillance feeds flickered with images that defied explanation. In the morgue, where Becky's corpse had been left for disposal, the recording showed something impossible. Her fingers twitched. Her body jerked. Then, with an almost lazy stretch, she sat up. The medical staff on duty had no time to react. She cracked her neck, rolled her shoulders, and looked around with an expression of mild annoyance. "Huh," she muttered. "That was weird." The guard stationed nearby hesitated. She had been dead, confirmed dead. And yet, she was rising to her feet, completely unharmed. Her eyes, once a warm brown, now flickered with something unnatural, something other. The lead guard raised his weapon. "Stand down," he barked. "You, whatever you are, return to the table immediately." Becky blinked at him. Then, with a smirk, she cracked her knuckles. "Nah." Before they could react, she moved. Fast. Too fast. One moment she was standing in place. The next, she had closed the distance, her fist driving into the guard's chest with enough force to launch him into the opposite wall. He hit with a sickening crunch and slumped to the floor. The others hesitated just a moment too long. That was their mistake. Becky's movements were fluid, instinctual. One soldier swung a plasma baton. She ducked, grabbed his arm, and twisted. A sharp snap echoed through the morgue as he collapsed with a strangled yell. Another fired his rifle, but she sidestepped, closing the distance before slamming his head into the metal table. The last one barely had time to scream before she sent him sprawling with a kick that dented the reinforced wall behind him. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. Becky stood in the center of the destruction, hands on her hips, surveying the mess. "Well," she said, exhaling, "guess I should go say hi to the Emperor." She turned toward the exit, rolling her shoulders. Whatever had happened to her, whatever the Empire had done, it had changed her, and she had a score to settle. With a grin, she stepped forward, completely unaware of the chaos she was about to unleash. The corridors of Zephyrion Prime hummed with mechanical precision, their stereometallic surfaces gleaming under the artificial light. The Empire prided itself on control, on predictability. Yet at this moment, chaos rippled through its most secure stronghold. Becky walked through the dimly lit hallways with the casual air of someone who had just finished a nap, stretching her arms overhead and rolling her shoulders. The soreness was already fading, but the sensation lingered, like a phantom memory of something important. The last thing she remembered was dying. Definitely dying. There had been pain, unbearable and all-consuming, and then nothing. Just a void. Now here she was. The guards she had dispatched lay crumpled in the morgue behind her, their weapons scattered like discarded toys. She wasn't sure how she had moved so fast, how her reflexes had sharpened into something lethal and precise. It was instinctual, like her body had suddenly been fine-tuned for destruction. Becky frowned, flexing her fingers. No trembling, no weakness. If anything, she felt better than before. Stronger, sharper, hungrier. Her stomach grumbled. Loudly, she sighed. Figures. Even after coming back from the dead, I still need a damn snack. The alarms blared, shrill and insistent. The Empire wasn't accustomed to dealing with anomalies. Their enemies bled, broke, and died. They didn't get back up. Security teams mobilized, tactical formations sweeping the halls in search of the impossible. a corpse that had somehow decided it wasn't done yet. Becky rounded a corner and nearly collided with a trio of soldiers. Their weapons were raised, expressions behind their sleek helmets wavering between terror and disbelief. She sighed. "Listen, fellas, I just woke up and I haven't had breakfast. Maybe we just—" They fired. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. The first plasma blast hissed past her ear, leaving the air scorched. The second should have hit center mass, but she twisted at an impossible angle, letting it graze past her ribs. The third was deflected before she even registered moving, her arms snapping up to send the bolt slamming into the opposite wall. The soldiers barely had time to react before she was in their space. The first one went down with a well-placed elbow to the throat. The second she grabbed by the wrist, twisting until his weapon was aimed at his own chest, forcing him to pull the trigger. The third managed to backpedal a step before she delivered a solid kick to his sternum, sending him airborne. He hit the wall hard enough to crack it. Becky took a slow breath, letting the moment settle. Her heart was steady. No adrenaline crash, no shaking hands. That should have been a red flag, but instead it felt right. She exhaled. "Welp, that's new." The ship's AI flickered to life through the intercom. Its voice was eerily calm, despite the panic in the air. "Attention. Subject Rebecca Simmons is active. Security Protocol Omega is now in effect. All personnel are to engage with extreme caution. Lethal force authorized." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, now you take me seriously." Somewhere deep in the ship, Zalzir was losing what little remained of his composure. The Emperor rarely let emotions dictate his actions, but this was unprecedented. He loomed over the hollow display, watching grainy security footage of Becky tearing through his finest warriors like they were made of wet paper. The way she moved, the speed, the unnatural precision. It was as if she had transcended the very limitations of her species. "Explain this," he commanded, voice glacial. The Imperial scientist standing before him shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white uniform. "Your Excellency, our initial analysis suggests that the energy pulses used during the execution may have, triggered an unforeseen genetic reaction." Zalzir's gaze sharpened. "Elaborate." The scientist swallowed hard. "Humans, despite their primitive biology, exhibit an alarming adaptability. The energy levels applied during her interrogation were beyond anything we have tested on organic subjects. Instead of terminating her, it appears her body adapted, rewrote itself on a molecular level. We have no precedent for this." The Emperor's expression darkened. "You're telling me we inadvertently evolved her?" The scientist hesitated before nodding. "In layman's terms, yes." Zalzir stared at the flickering holofeed, where Becky was now casually rifling through what appeared to be a food storage unit, taking a large bite out of something that was definitely not meant for human consumption. The Emperor's jaw clenched. "Kill her. Immediately." Garath, standing at attention beside the throne, shifted uneasily. "Sire, we have already deployed the Omega Protocol. It is unlikely that conventional methods—" "Then use unconventional ones," Zalzir snapped. "I want her reduced to atoms. No more mistakes." The order was given. Half the ship descended upon Becky with the single-minded focus of a machine. The Empire was ruthless, and when it felt threatened, it responded with overwhelming force. Becky had just finished her improvised meal when the first barrage hit. The corridor around her exploded in a storm of plasma fire, incendiary rounds detonating against the walls. The blast radius should have shredded her instantly, but instead, she simply moved. Her body weaved through the chaos like a ghost, each shift of her weight avoiding destruction by the thinnest of margins. It wasn't reflex, it was something deeper, something instinctual. One of the larger explosions propelled her forward, and instead of being thrown helplessly, she twisted midair, using the momentum to launch herself toward the nearest soldier. She landed atop him with the grace of a predator, yanking his weapon from his grip and spinning it into her own hands. The gun was unfamiliar, alien in design, But as her fingers wrapped around the hilt, something clicked. Information flooded her mind, as if the knowledge had been downloaded into her consciousness. Her grin was all teeth. "All right, let's play." The air filled with a shriek of plasma as she returned fire. The weapon felt like an extension of herself, and each shot hit with precise, devastating efficiency. The Empire had been prepared for a prisoner. They had not been prepared for this. Bodies fell. Soldiers broke formation. Some ran. Becky didn't blame them. She barely felt the exertion as she sprinted through the chaos, her body adapting to the rhythm of battle with terrifying ease. It was exhilarating. At some point, she realized she was laughing. Garath watched the slaughter unfold from the command deck, his expression unreadable. Around him, officers whispered nervously, exchanging glances that bordered on panic. "This isn't possible," one of them muttered. Garath had no words. He had fought many battles, had witnessed countless atrocities in the name of the Empire. But this was something else, something worse. Then a transmission cut through the chaos. It was Becky. Her voice crackled through the command channel, casual and amused. "Hey, lizard boys, just thought I'd check in. You know, since I should be dead and all." The silence in the command deck was deafening. Garath leaned forward. How am I alive? How am I tearing through your fleet like a kid in an arcade?" Her voice dripped with amusement. "No idea, but I am having a blast. And honestly, this is your own damn fault." Zalzir's expression was carved from stone. "What do you want?" he demanded. Becky's laughter was soft, but it carried an edge. "Well, first, revenge. Second, I'm thinking I might just take your throne. What do you think, boys? Does Empress Becky have a nice ring to it?" The line cut out. Garath exhaled. "We are so screwed." Zalzir's grip tightened around his throne. "Not yet. We still have our last weapon. The final contingency. A creature of pure devastation. The only thing in the galaxy that might be able to stop her." The Emperor's gaze darkened. It was time to unleash the beast. And Becky? She was ready for round two. The warship trembled with the force of the impending battle, alarms wailing in protest against the utter chaos Becky had unleashed upon the Galactic Empire's most secure vessel. The corridors were littered with broken weapons, fallen soldiers, and an assortment of alien technology she hadn't quite figured out, but had enthusiastically repurposed as blunt force instruments. The Empire had thrown everything at her, and she had shrugged it off like an annoying commercial break. Zalzir sat rigid on his throne, eyes locked onto the central holoscreen where security feeds displayed Becky's unstoppable rampage. She moved like something out of a nightmare, or a really good action movie, dodging plasma blasts with effortless precision, using the walls to propel herself forward, and at one point, flipping over a barricade just to land on an unsuspecting officer's shoulders before kicking him unconscious. She was raw, relentless momentum, fueled by defiance and an increasing sense of invincibility. "This is impossible," a high-ranking officer muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's a human. She should be dead." Garath interrupted, folding his arms. "Yeah, well, so should most of us after what she's done." Zalzir's claws tapped against the armrest of his throne. His empire was absolute. His word was law. And yet, here was a single human, tearing through his finest warriors, as if they were background extras in a poorly choreographed fight scene. "This cannot continue," the Emperor said coldly. "Deploy the honor guard." Garath tensed at the mention of the Empire's most elite warriors. They were undefeated, feared across the galaxy, clad in obsidian armor, wielding weapons forged from collapsed star fragments. They were considered more legend than reality. If anyone could stop Becky, it would be them. Becky, meanwhile, had just found a vending machine. It stood awkwardly in the middle of the carnage, a bright and completely out-of-place relic in an otherwise grim hallway of destruction. She popped open one of its compartments and pulled out what looked suspiciously like a protein bar, peeling back the wrapper. "This better not taste like cardboard," she muttered, taking a bite. Her face immediately twisted in disgust. Ugh, it does. She tossed the rest aside, dusted off her hands, and continued down the corridor, oblivious to the gathering force ahead. It was only when she heard the synchronized stomp of armored boots that she realized she wasn't alone. The honor guard stood at the end of the hallway, a dozen towering figures in blackened steel. Their helmets concealed any emotion, their weapons hummed with barely contained energy, and their leader stepped forward with all the grace of a predator approaching its prey. Becky cracked her knuckles. Oh great, more guys who don't know when to quit. The leader's voice was a deep, metallic growl. Rebecca Simmons, by the decree of Emperor Zalzir, you are to be eliminated. She sighed. Yeah, I got the memo. She shifted her stance. All right, boys. Who's first? They didn't answer with words. They answered with a full frontal assault. They moved in perfect synchronization, an unstoppable tide of blades and plasma fire. Most people would have been overwhelmed in seconds, outmatched by sheer numbers and skill. But Becky wasn't most people. She dodged the first strike by mere centimeters, feeling the heat of an energy blade pass inches from her neck. She twisted, ducked, countered, moving with an unnatural fluidity that should have been impossible for any human. One soldier lunged, aiming to skewer her through the chest. Becky caught his wrist midair, twisted, and flipped him over her shoulder, sending him crashing into two of his comrades. Another came from behind, swinging a crackling electrostaff in a precise arc. She ducked under the blow, grabbed the staff mid-swing, and yanked it from his hands, spinning it once before slamming the blunt end into his helmet. The rest hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was a mistake. Becky capitalized on the brief lapse, launching herself forward. She was a blur, a force of nature. She yanked a sidearm from one of their holsters and fired in rapid succession, each shot landing with terrifying accuracy. By the time she landed back on the ground, half the honor guard were down. The remaining warriors circled her warily. They had faced the deadliest enemies in the galaxy, conquered civilizations, shattered entire fleets. And yet, in this moment, against this one human, they faltered. Becky grinned, rolling her shoulders. All right, round two. The honor guard adjusted their stance, preparing for a renewed assault. Then the ship lurched violently, nearly throwing everyone off their feet. Something massive had just been deployed. Becky frowned. What was that? The remaining guards hesitated before retreating, their loyalty overridden by sheer survival instinct. The lights flickered and the air shifted, as if the very gravity of the ship had changed. Then the walls trembled. Zalzir had activated the final failsafe. Becky barely had time to react before something enormous dropped from the ceiling, a thing of metal and shifting flesh, forged in the darkest labs of the Empire. It loomed before her, a towering monstrosity of exposed wires, pulsating energy cores, and biomechanical plating. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with the kind of intelligence that didn't belong in something so wrong. Becky took a step back. Okay, that's cheating. The creature lunged. She barely dodged in time, rolling under its sweeping claw as it obliterated the bulkhead behind her. The ship groaned under the sheer force of its attacks. Becky scrambled to her feet, instinct taking over, her mind racing for a strategy. Its movements were fast, too fast for something so large. Its claws raked through the walls, slicing metal like paper. Becky weaved between its attacks, but it was getting closer, adapting. All right, think, she muttered to herself. Can't punch it to death. Can't outrun it forever. What would John McClane do? She spotted the energy core embedded in its chest, a weak point. She grinned. Well, that's convenient. The beast roared, charging forward. Becky ran, not away, but toward it. At the last second, she slid between its legs, twisting mid-motion and yanking an exposed wire from its lower plating. The creature staggered, sparks flying. Becky used the moment to leap onto its back, climbing toward the core with practiced agility. The beast thrashed, trying to shake her off, but she held on, reaching for the core. It was heavily shielded, encased in an alloy that wouldn't break under normal circumstances. Fortunately, Becky wasn't normal anymore. With a sharp exhale, She punched the casing. The metal dented. She punched it again. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. "All right," she muttered. "One more for the road." She slammed her fist down one final time, breaking through. The core pulsed violently before detonating. Becky launched herself off just as the creature collapsed, its death throes shaking the ship to its core. She landed in a roll, skidding to a halt. The wreckage of the beast lay behind her, twitching, burning. She dusted off her hands. Welp. That was fun. Across the ship, in the throne room, Zalzir watched in silence. His jaw was tight, his claws digging into the armrests. Garath slowly turned to him. "So plan C." The Emperor didn't respond. His empire, his perfect empire, was crumbling at the hands of one human. A human who had just survived the deadliest creation in his arsenal. And she was still coming for him. Zalzir exhaled, his gaze flickering toward the massive viewport overlooking the stars. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. And Becky? She was winning. The final confrontation was drawing near. Zalzir, the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, sat motionless on his throne, his mind a storm of cold fury. The screen before him flickered with images of his once proud warriors, fallen and broken. The honor guard, his elite soldiers, the best of the best, had been annihilated by the one human who had defied all logic and reason. Becky Simmons had become more than a threat. She had become the embodiment of his failure. Every measure he had taken to subdue her had failed. She had shrugged off his most brutal methods, mocked his greatest warriors, and torn through his fleet like a wildfire. And now there was only one thing left to do. He would have to end this personally. Becky was coming for him. He could feel it. His imperial palace had been breached. Her movements were swift, unpredictable, and relentless. His soldiers had scattered, and the ship was already spiraling toward collapse. His empire was crumbling at the hands of a single human. He stood from his throne, his claws flexing. The tension in his chest tightened into a knot. This would not stand. No one. Challenge his reign and live to tell the tale. He would destroy her. He would show the galaxy the true power of the Empire. His voice echoed through the halls of Zephyrion Prime as he activated the ship's internal defense systems. Massive steel gates sealed off the throne room. Energy shields hummed to life, creating an impenetrable barrier around him. Zalzir's armor-clad form shimmered as he prepared for the final battle. His greatest weapon, his last chance, was ready. "I will destroy you, human," he hissed through clenched teeth. His words were a promise, but there was a slight tremor beneath them. Fear. Meanwhile, Becky had just finished wreaking havoc in the palace's lower levels. She wasn't tired, nor was she out of breath. She didn't even feel winded. Something about the battle had altered her perception, her body attuned to the chaos around her. She was different now, stronger, faster, more aware of her surroundings. Her regeneration was near perfect. The memories of death were slipping from her mind, replaced by the certainty of victory. She wasn't sure how, but whatever had happened to her after her death had unlocked something inside of her, something primal and unstoppable. She reached the final set of security doors leading into the throne room. The walls were scarred by blaster fire, and the air crackled with the residual hum of a failed defense. She glanced around for a moment, the battle-scarred corridors telling the tale of an empire on the edge of collapse. The Empire's final defenses would not be enough to stop her. Not anymore. As she approached the reinforced door, she felt the change, the unmistakable pressure of energy building up on the other side. Zalzir was waiting for her. She didn't hesitate. Becky slammed into the door with a force that should have crushed her bones. Instead, the door buckled inward, and she was through. She tumbled into the throne room, rolling to a standing position with a speed that felt almost effortless. The sound of her boots striking the marble floor echoed through the vast chamber. Zalzir's cold, steely gaze met hers from across the room. He stood atop a platform, his towering form radiating power, his regal armor gleaming in the dim light. The Emperor's presence was palpable, and for a moment, even Becky could feel the weight of his power. But she wasn't afraid. Rebecca Simmons, Zalzir's voice boomed, laced with venom and unrelenting authority. You dare defy me one last time? Becky's lips curled into a smirk. Yep, pretty much. You can stop with the speech. I've heard it all before. Just thought I'd give you a chance to say something cool before I kick your ass. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his entire being radiating fury. He waved his hand, and the energy shield surrounding his throne room pulsed to life with a deafening hum. This is the end, human. I will crush you, he sneered. Becky's grin widened. We'll see about that. The Emperor's stance shifted, and with a sudden motion, he launched a blast of pure energy toward her. The beam was blinding, hot enough to incinerate anything in its path. But Becky wasn't there. She was already in motion, her body a blur as she darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the devastating attack. The blast hit the floor behind her, sending debris scattering in every direction. The ground beneath her trembled, but she didn't pause. She kept moving. Zalzir roared in anger, his massive form lunging toward her with surprising speed. His claws slashed the air, cutting through the space where Becky had been just a second earlier. She ducked low and rolled, narrowly avoiding his strike, and in the same fluid motion, she delivered a brutal punch to his armored side. The force of the blow sent the Emperor stumbling back, his gaze flashing with both disbelief and fury. You think you can defeat me? Zalzir bellowed, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. Becky tilted her head, her expression mockingly innocent. Hey, I'm just a girl with a really bad attitude and some serious firepower. You should have learned by now that it's a bad idea to mess with humans. The Emperor's eyes flashed, and with a swipe of his arm, the floor beneath them cracked open, sending shockwaves through the room. The debris floated into the air, swirling like a storm around them. Zalzir's power surged, but Becky was already 2 steps ahead. She had learned to read his movements, predict his attacks. The energy around the room intensified, and the air began to hum with deadly intent. Zalzir raised both arms, a concentrated ball of energy forming above his head, his most devastating weapon. He was ready to unleash everything he had, to obliterate her with a single catastrophic strike. But Becky wasn't intimidated. She eyed the ball of energy for a moment, calculating. Then, without a second thought, she sprang into action. She charged, ducking under a barrage of energy blasts, using the debris around her as cover. The Emperor's eyes followed her every movement, but it was too late. With a sharp twist, Becky launched herself at the Emperor, delivering a punishing kick to his chest that sent him reeling back. His armor cracked under the force, his footing unstable. The energy ball above him flickered dangerously, unstable in the wake of the attack. Becky saw the opportunity. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, her fists finding the soft points in his armor. She punched with everything she had, targeting the joints, the gaps, the places where his armor could no longer withstand the force of her blows. Zalzir staggered, trying to counter her attacks, but it was too late. With a final devastating punch, Becky drove her fist into the Emperor's chest. The sound of cracking metal filled the room, followed by a sickening thud as the armor collapsed under the pressure. For a brief moment, there was silence. The Emperor stood motionless, his eyes wide in shock, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His once indomitable form crumbled to the ground, defeated. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire, the tyrant who had ruled with absolute power, was no more. Becky stood over him, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. She had done it. She had won. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The throne room was still, save for the soft hum of the failing energy shields. The echoes of the battle reverberated through the wreckage, the sound of an empire's fall. Becky stood tall, her gaze fixed on the broken body of Zalzir. Her fists were bloodied, but she didn't care. The galaxy would remember today, not for the fall of an emperor, but for the rise of something new, something human. And as she turned to walk away, she couldn't help but grin. This was just the beginning.